Welcome back everyone. Let's go ahead and talk about another phone that just came out really not that long ago. It's not even a year old, but let's go and see how it holds up in 2021. And this phone is the Xiaomi Redmi Note 9. Now, if you watched my other Mi 9 video, this is actually the Redmi Note 9. I made the video of the Mi 9. I basically said I haven't talked about too many Xiaomi phones, so I figured I might as well buy a bunch of them and start reviewing them. And this is another one of those devices. And what I can tell you is that from the few devices that I've owned from Xiaomi, I realize there is a problem with these devices in my opinion, from my experience. But the overall experience of these devices for the price tag is super insane. It's such a tremendous phone for a lot of different reasons. And the fact that we just got the Xiaomi Redmi Note 9T and the Note 9T Pro, this is definitely going to make a lot of people look at these devices and be like, should I pick up the Note 9 or the Note 9T? This isn't necessarily a comparison, but what I will tell you is that these devices have so much value for sure. And I'll find the cheapest ones on Amazon and link them down in the description below. You can get them from there and help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the front, the Xiaomi Redmi Note 9 has a 6.53-inch IPS panel, and it's a 1080p panel, so it's full HD. And I'll definitely tell you, I don't think the panel of this phone is a con or a pro. I think it's a pretty good panel. And if I had to kind of, water it down, I would say it's probably more of a pro than a con. The fact that it is a hole punch display is really, really good. And I actually do like that. There's not even that much bezel around the display. There's a little tiny bezel on the bottom, but it's not that big of a deal. And I really do think the panel of this phone is actually pretty good. Now, it is an IPS panel. And again, it's definitely not one of my favorite things to look at, but honestly, from IPS to OLED, it's totally okay, and I really don't think it's that big of a deal. I do wish that it did kind of have some type of, 90 Hz refresh rate or something like that, but I think the panel is perfectly fine as it is. And with that hole punch display, it definitely makes it look that much better. Now, you do have USB Type-C on the bottom of this phone, but on top of that, you actually do have some water repellent coating, not necessarily IP certification, but it's still okay. And you do have a microSD card slot on this phone again. And that is such a humongous aspect for this device because it's a budget phone kind of, but also it's not a super old device. This thing just came out last year. And the fact that it still has a microSD card slot is super awesome to me. And I really, really love that. That's definitely one of my favorite features for sure. So in terms of the whole entire microSD card slot and everything, I love it. On the back, you do have a glass back on this device, which is really nice. Now on the back, you do have kind of a plastic back. It doesn't really feel completely that bad, but it is plastic, so keep that in mind. But it is kind of understandable for Xiaomi to get into this price tag, so I think it's totally okay for the most part. And it really doesn't really bother me too much if I'm being honest. But on top of that plastic back, you do have the camera setup, which I'll go ahead and hit on right now. So you have a 48 megapixel wide angle lens, you have an 8 megapixel ultra wide sensor, a 2 megapixel macro lens, then a 2 megapixel depth sensor, no telephoto lens. And funny enough, when I first bought this phone, I actually thought there was a telephoto lens on it because for 4 cameras, I thought there was going to be a lot more features, but I've said this before and I'll say it again, the macro and depth lens, I don't really know too many people who use those type of things. I'm more of a person who wants the triple camera setup, the wide, ultra wide, and telephoto, but this is still perfectly fine. I'd rather have an ultra wide than a telephoto, but I'd rather have all of it. And I think the camera is definitely an okay aspect of this device. There's no 4K you can film on the back as far as I know, only 1080p, and I think that's probably the biggest problem here. I really wish it did have some sort of capability when it came up to the higher video resolutions and stuff, but I think at the end of the day, it's totally okay when you consider the fact that this phone, it isn't supposed to be competing, with the Samsung Galaxy S20 or the iPhone 12 Pro Max. It's really only supposed to be competing with, other budget phones that are around that, $300 price range in America. And I think it's even cheaper in a lot of other places. So that's another pretty big area I would like to hit on. But I think, as I said before, in the whole entire grand scheme of things, the back camera of this thing, the fact that it has an ultra-wide sensor and the other 2 lenses really does speak mountains, and I think it's totally okay for the time being. On the front, you do have a 13 megapixel camera, and again, only 1080p at 30, and I think the front camera, it's a little bit more justifiable, but I really, I'm somebody who uses the front camera more than the back camera, so that's another huge area to look at. But I think in terms of the camera setup, it's overall okay for the price tag. But I think a phone like the Pixel 4a that costs around this price tag, even the iPhone SE2, here in America, you can pick them up in the used market for cheaper and around the same price as this thing. And those things have far better cameras than this. Even though this one looks better, those cameras on those devices are better. But that's kind of how it's some of this whole entire camera aspect of this device. Now, software wise, this phone does have, it started off with Android 10. I think it is going to be getting MIUI 13 very soon on Android 11, if it already hasn't gotten it, but I got it when it had Android 10, and I think that's okay. It's definitely an okay version of software. I think, in my opinion, the software side of these things, I'm not really a huge fan of MIUI. I don't know how easy it is to custom ROM this device, but I don't really want to say it's necessarily a con because there are people who like MIUI, so I'm not going to sit here and say that's a con necessarily. But as far as I know, there's no custom ROM capability, but you can always download a custom launcher and install it. You have Google Play on this thing, so you can easily just install a bunch of Android apps that way. So I think in terms of that pretty much covers it up in the software standpoint. Now, performance-wise, this phone does have, the MediaTek Helio G85 chipset. That's the first time I've ever said that out loud. The octa-core CPU, a Mali GPU, and the RAM variants are a little bit different. So the base model has 3 gigs of RAM. That's the base model I had. The mid-tier models have 4 gigs of RAM, and the top-tier model has 6 gigs of RAM. So what I can tell you in terms of the whole entire RAM management of this specific device and just the overall performance aspect, it's really not like a bad performing phone. I think this phone is actually a pretty decent performing phone for the price tag. And what's funny is when you're holding this phone in your hand and you're going through one app to the other and you're scrolling through, it really isn't that bad of a performing phone. I think, me included, when I first bought this phone at that price tag, I was kind of, scared. I've never had a phone with a chipset with the MediaTek chipset, so I didn't know how it was going to perform and everything, but it really wasn't that bad. And I think that's a pretty good aspect of this device. I think the performance for the price really isn't that bad. But again, if you're going to compare this type of phone to maybe like a Galaxy S20 with the 120Hz refresh rate and a much more RAM and a much better system inside of it, you're definitely going to run into some problems because that phone is going to be way faster. But at the end of the day, you're still going to be getting a pretty good performing device from this for the price tag. Now, there are some areas where it kind of rubs me the wrong way. As I said before, the RAM management definitely isn't a pro. It can definitely be a con to some people. So that's definitely one area where I would kind of look at to be like, it's definitely not that great. And that's probably an area where a lot of people would also agree, unless you get maybe the more top tier model. But I think day-to-day tasks, if you don't want to do anything super crazy with this device, the performance I think will be perfectly fine for a bunch of people out there. So in terms of performance, that's pretty much just how I would cover it up. Now, one of the best aspects of this device is that it does have a humongous 5,020 mAh battery, and it actually has a reverse charging, but there's no reverse wireless charging or any wireless charging on this device. But that battery size is pretty big in my opinion, and it really lasted me quite a bit of time. Like, it wasn't like it was just dying in one day. It was lasting for a very, very long amount of time. So I'll definitely tell you, the battery life of this device is definitely a humongous asset for sure. So to kind of sum up this whole entire video and to answer the question, is the Xiaomi Redmi Note 9 still worth it in 2021? Well, this is what I'll tell you. Here are some pros for this device just to get out of the way. The panel of this phone is actually an asset in my opinion because of the price tag. At first I was kind of like hesitant, but I think it's actually more of an asset than not once I vocalized it out loud. It's a hole punch display. Even though it's only an IPS panel, it's still a pretty good IPS panel for the most part. It's not bad. And like I said before, I think it's definitely a pro when it comes down to it. The quadruple camera setup is very interesting. It's definitely not an amazing set of cameras, but it'll get the job done, and it has multiple camera sensors. It feels pretty good in the hand. It doesn't feel like a cheap phone. You have USB Type-C. You have a humongous battery life inside of it. So the battery size, that in and of itself is a humongous selling point of this device. And I actually don't think the performance is that bad on this device either. So there's definitely some pros for it, but there are some cons that may rub people the wrong way. The front is not an OLED panel. That's kind of a small thing, but it may be a big deal to some people. The cameras on this device definitely are amazing. I don't think if you're trying to get the best camera from your device, this is probably not it. Going up to like Xiaomi Mi 10 or Xiaomi Mi 11, those are definitely going to be getting you better cameras. This is definitely, a watered down version of camera for sure. You have a plastic back. To some people that may be a pro, to some that may be a con. You have, a different type of software. Maybe some people don't like it. Me personally, I'm not really a huge fan of this type of, MIUI. I'm not a huge fan of it, I'll be honest. But some people may like it, so that's another thing. There's not a lot of RAM on this device either, so that may be another problem to some people. For me, I think it's okay because I already know what I'm getting into. But if you think this will compete with something like a Galaxy S20 or Galaxy S21, or an iPhone 12 Pro Max, there's definitely some problems here. So that's kind of what I would tell you. The front camera also is not a huge aspect that I'm kind of like, wow, this is a really good front camera. There's no wireless charging or anything like that, but you do have reverse charging and you do have a micro SD card slot, which those two things are also huge aspects of this device, which really make it that much better in my opinion. So that's kind of how I would sum it up. I will leave a Xiaomi Redmi Note 9 in the description, as well as some other phones that I kind of think is comparable in this price range. If you guys want to buy them from there, you can and help support the channel at the same time. But that's really pretty much it. If you guys have any other questions or anything, let me know in the comment section as well. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it means so much if you guys can hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my other channels. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.